September 25th, 2021, somewhere around 4 in the afternoon, and Zack Schneider is sitting in the observation car of Amtrak's Empire Builder watching Montana's Great Plains roll by outside the window. He's 28 years old, got his whole life ahead of him, probably thinking about where he's going to grab dinner once they pull into Seattle. A few cars back, Don and Margie Varnado are walking between coaches, holding hands like they've been doing for 50 years, because that's exactly what they're celebrating, their 50th wedding anniversary, a trip across America on one of the most scenic train routes in the country. And then at 3:56 Mountain Time, 8 passenger cars leave the track at 77 miles per hour, 4 of them rolling completely onto their sides, windows popping out of their frames, passengers thrown around like dolls in a washing machine. When the dust settles, Zack Schneider is gone. Don and Margie Varnado, the couple who made it half a century together, they're gone too. 49 other people are hurt, some of them badly, and what's left of the Empire Builder is scattered across a curve in the Highline subdivision about 50 miles west of Have. Now here's where it gets interesting, and I mean interesting in the worst possible way. 2 days before this happened, a BNSF track inspector drove right over that exact spot, drove over it in his maintenance vehicle, noted some anomalies in the track, wrote it down in his log, and then he kept driving. Didn't stop, didn't get out, didn't walk the track to take a closer look at what was happening underneath those rails. The National Transportation Safety Board spent 2 years investigating this thing, and when they released their final report in July of 2023, they found something that should make your blood run cold. That inspector, the guy who drove past the defects that would take 3 lives 2 days later, he had been working a 16-hour shift that day, 16 hours covering 127 miles of track. The NTSB called it, and I'm quoting them here, an excessive amount of track. They found he probably didn't have time to stop and walk the rails even if he wanted to. His workload was simply too massive. But that's just the beginning of this story, because when you start pulling on this thread, the whole sweater comes apart. The NTSB didn't just blame the inspector or even BNSF. They pointed directly at the Federal Railroad Administration, the agency that's supposed to be keeping all of us safe when we ride trains or live near tracks, and they said the FRA has been ignoring recommendations about exactly this kind of thing for decades, literally decades. The worn rail that caused this derailment, the stuff that had deteriorated to the point where train wheels were hitting the joint bars, there's been a recommendation sitting on the FRA's desk since 1980 telling them to set limits on how much a rail can wear down before it has to be replaced. 1980. That's 45 years ago. The NTSB made that recommendation after a freight train carrying vinyl chloride derailed in Muldrow, Kentucky, same chemical that turned East Palestine into a toxic nightmare in 2023, and the cause was the exact same thing. Worn-out rail that nobody replaced because there's no federal rule saying they have to. In 1998, the FRA actually sponsored a study that confirmed these limits would improve safety. The study said yes, this would work, this would prevent derailments, this would save lives. And then the FRA did absolutely nothing with it, filed it away somewhere and forgot about it. 25 more years passed before the Joplin disaster, and still no rule exists. So the NTSB in 2023, after those 3 people are gone and 49 others are injured, they recommend the rail wear limits again. Same recommendation they made in 1980. Same recommendation they've been making for over 4 decades. The FRA's response, according to the NTSB website as of late 2025, is silence. No further action documented. Now, I want you to understand the scale of what we're talking about here, because Joplin is just one tiny piece of a much larger pattern. The Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at the University of Maryland did an analysis of the last 10 years of NTSB safety recommendations to the FRA. From 2015 through 2024, the NTSB gave the Federal Railroad Administration 81 recommendations. These are recommendations that came out of major accident investigations, the kind of investigations that happen when something goes catastrophically wrong and people get hurt or worse. 81 recommendations over 10 years. You want to know how many the FRA fully implemented? 5. 5 out of 81. That's a 6% completion rate. And when? The Howard Center compared that to other agencies in the Department of Transportation. The FRA came in dead last. The Federal Aviation Administration, the highway safety people, the Coast Guard, all of them do better at implementing safety recommendations than the agency that's supposed to be watching over America's railroads. The FRA told the Howard Center they have 102 open NTSB recommendations right now, some of them dating all the way back to 1998. They said they're taking action or planning to take action on more than 70% of them. But planning to take action and actually taking action are two very different things, and the bodies keep piling up while the paperwork keeps shuffling. Let me tell you about positive train control, because this is maybe the most damning example of all. PTC is a system that uses GPS and onboard computers to automatically slow down or stop a train before certain types of accidents can happen. If an engineer misses a signal, if a train is going too fast for a curve, if two trains are about to collide, PTC steps in and prevents it. The technology exists, it works, and the NTSB has been asking for it since 1970. August of 1969, two Penn Central commuter trains collide head-on in Darien, Connecticut. The conductor of one train missed a signal to stop, or ignored it, or misread it. Nobody knows for sure, because he didn't survive to explain. 4 people gone, 43 injured. The NTSB investigates, and in 1970, they issue their first recommendation for what would eventually become known as positive train control, a system that would have prevented that exact type of accident by automatically stopping the train when the signal was read. That was 50 years before PTC was finally fully operational on American railroads. 50 years. And in those 50 years, the NTSB kept investigating accidents that PTC could have prevented, and they kept making the same recommendation, and the railroads and the FRA kept finding reasons not to do it. Too expensive, too complicated, not technically feasible yet, always something. The NTSB kept a running count. By the time PTC was finally implemented at the end of 2020, they had investigated 154 accidents that this technology could have prevented. 154 separate incidents where people lost their lives or got mangled because a system that existed, that worked, that the safety board had been begging for since Richard Nixon was president, wasn't installed on American trains. The toll from those 154 accidents, 305 people gone. 6,883 injured. And here's the really infuriating part. In 2008, Congress finally stepped in and mandated PTC installation by the end of 2015. The law passed right after the Chatsworth disaster in California, where a Metrolink commuter train slammed into a Union Pacific freight because the engineer was texting and missed a red signal. 25 people gone in that one. Congress said enough. Install PTC by 2015, end of story. But the railroad industry had other ideas. They lobbied hard. They sued the FRA over the implementation rules. Between 2008 and 2015, the Association of American Railroads, which represents the big freight carriers, spent something like $69 million on lobbying efforts. That's according to their own disclosure reports. They spent another $25 million on campaign contributions over 4 election cycles. And 2 months before the deadline was supposed to hit, Congress caved and pushed it back to 2018, with extensions available until 2020. Meanwhile, accidents kept happening. In 2015, an Amtrak train in Philadelphia took a curve at over 100 miles an hour in a 50 zone. Engineer was distracted, possibly by reports of another train getting hit by rocks. 8 people lost their lives, 185 injured. PTC would have prevented it. In 2017, another Amtrak train, this one near DuPont, Washington, went off an overpass at 80 in a 30 zone. The engineer misjudged his location. 3 gone, more than 50 hurt. Sound Transit, which owned that section of track, was in the process of installing PTC at the time, but it wasn't operational yet. The railroads finally achieved full PTC compliance on December 29, 2020. 50 years and 305 preventable losses after the NTSB first recommended the technology. And the thing is, nobody went to prison over this. No executives faced charges. The industry just kept operating, kept making money, kept lobbying for less regulation, while people kept getting hurt on tracks that everyone knew could be made safer. But wait, because it gets worse, the Association of American Railroads is now actively lobbying the current administration to roll back safety rules that are already on the books. When the Department of Government Efficiency asked the public for ideas on cutting regulations this spring, the AAR responded within 2 weeks with a 31-page spreadsheet listing 80 federal rules they want modified or eliminated. On that list, the two-person crew requirement, the rule that says freight trains, some of which stretch more than 3 miles long, should have at least 2 qualified people in the locomotive. The railroads argue there's no evidence that two-person crews are safer than one-person crews. The unions argue that having a second set of eyes, someone to bounce ideas off during an 11-hour overnight shift, someone who can help if there's an emergency, is essential. The FRA finalized a rule requiring two-person crews in 2024, and the industry immediately started pushing to have it repealed. Also on that list, reducing the frequency of human track inspections. The railroads want to rely more on automated systems and less on actual people walking the rails. Never mind that in Joplin, the NTSB found that a walking inspection probably would have caught the defects that caused the derailment. Never mind that automated systems, as good as they are at finding certain problems, can't detect more than 2/3 of the issues that trained human inspectors are looking for. Also on that list, loosening the administrative requirements for fatigue management plans. This one is particularly galling when you consider the history. The Hours of Service Act, the law that's supposed to prevent railroad workers from being worked into exhaustion, dates back to 1907. It was last substantially updated in 1969. Under current rules, a train crew can work 11 hours and 59 minutes, get 8 hours off, and then work another 11 hours and 59 minutes over and over and over again. And there's something called limbo time, the period when a crew is waiting for transportation at the end of their shift, that doesn't count as either work time or rest time. It's just a black hole in the schedule. The NTSB has been warning about crew fatigue for decades. In 2004, a Union Pacific engineer who had gotten less than 2 hours of sleep blew through a signal light in McDonough, Texas, and collided with a BNSF train. 3 people were taken by the cloud of chlorine gas that escaped from a punctured tank car. 30 more were left in severe respiratory distress. The NTSB found that fatigue from chronic sleep loss, disrupted sleep cycles, and long work shifts led directly to the engineer's mistake. They recommended that the FRA require railroads to use scientifically based principles when assigning work schedules. That was 2006. The FRA didn't issue a final rule on fatigue management until 2022, 16 years later. They didn't finish approving all the railroads' fatigue management plans until this year. And now, the industry wants to reduce the administrative requirements, make it easier to skip the paperwork, make it harder to prove that anyone was too tired to be operating a train. The Howard Center found that from 2015 through 2024, fatigue-related accidents took at least 9 lives and injured more than 330 people. 9 families that will never be whole again because somebody was too exhausted to see the signal clearly, because somebody's sleep schedule had been inverted so many times they didn't know which way was up, because the rules that are supposed to prevent this keep getting delayed and watered down and lobbied against by an industry that makes billions of dollars moving freight across the country. And here's where we are now. The FRA just approved a waiver that will let railroads cut their weekly visual track inspections in half, as long as they meet certain other requirements. The AAR is pushing for more. The current administration seems receptive to cutting regulations wherever possible. Meanwhile, more than 100 NTSB recommendations sit in limbo, some of them decades old, waiting for action that may never come. Every day, freight trains carrying hazardous materials roll through communities across America. Every day, passenger trains carry people who trust that someone is watching out for their safety. Every day, track inspectors try to cover impossible amounts of territory in shifts that leave them exhausted. And every day, the gap between what we know would make railroads safer and what actually gets implemented grows a little wider. The families of Zach Schneider and Don and Margie Varnado aren't getting any answers. The NTSB says if the rail wear limits recommended in 1980 had been implemented, BNSF would have been required to replace the track that took those 3 lives. Instead, that recommendation sat for 45 years while the FRA found other priorities. And now, in 2026, we're still waiting for a rule that the safety experts said we needed when Jimmy Carter was president. The railroads will tell you they're committed to safety. The FRA will tell you they're working on it. The numbers tell a different story. 3,000 accidents caused by human error and track defects over the last decade, 23 people gone, nearly 1,200 injured, and 81 recommendations from the one agency whose entire job is figuring out how to prevent these things from happening again, with only 5 of them actually put into practice. That's where it stands.